So good afternoon, and thank you for joining us. My name is Karen Corman, and I have the privilege of being the Executive Director of the UIC Alumni Association. Welcome to the UIC Alumni Exchange Series. We are hosting weekly events that bring you news, knowledge, and entertainment to help you explore, connect, and escape from the everyday with a community of UIC alumni and faculty experts. You'll hear me say this a few times today, but I encourage you to visit go.uic.edu/alumni exchange for the latest and greatest programming. We have just a few housekeeping items before we get started here. All participants, as you probably have already noticed, have been muted, but we encourage you to keep your cameras on because we love to see faces. If you have questions throughout, please do put them in the chat box. We will get to them as many as we can, and please do it throughout the presentation as our team will be collecting them and then sharing them when we get to the Q&A part. Please do be aware that this is being recorded and will be available in approximately 10 days afterward at the Alumni Exchange website for future viewing. We do recommend that you stay in speaker view, which is in the right-hand upper corner, because again, we like to see your faces. And don't worry if you're eating lunch, we don't mind. And also, while we have taken precautions to prevent intruders, please know that if our session is unexpectedly and inappropriately interrupted, we will immediately end the session and will send an email with additional information. And finally, you will receive a 30-second survey after the presentation. Please let us know your thoughts, as it certainly helps us with future programming. And with that, I'm excited to get this program started this afternoon with Got Sleep, Strategies for Restful Nights and Energized Days. We welcome the Dean of our UIC College of Nursing, Dean Terri Weaver. It is also Nurses Week, and we are extremely grateful to have Dean Weaver with us and want to send our thanks and gratitude to all of our nurses for all the incredible work you do every day. It is now my pleasure to turn it over to Dean Weaver. Thank you, Dean Weaver, for being here with us today.
Thank you so much. And again, I also want to wish a happy Nurses Week to all nurses who are watching, especially and appropriately our nursing alumni from the College of Nursing. I know this is a really tough time, and that creates a lot of worry and anxiety, which makes it really difficult to sleep. So I think this topic is very timely. I've been engaged in sleep research for over 30 years, and it's a wonderful field. And I hope to share with you some overview of societal influences that relate to obtaining sleep. Also, we're going to talk, hold on here. We're going to talk about the 5 stages of sleep, a little bit of physiology, the impact of sleep on health and functioning, and finally, the grand finale, the most important thing, which is how to improve your sleep and the do's and don'ts of sleep, because there are rules. I want you to meet Joanne Gonzalez. She starts her day at 5:30 in the morning and ends them, well, whenever all that caffeine wears off. After she wakes up, she does several loads of laundry, sees her husband off to work, fixes breakfast for her kids, and then takes them to school. And then at night, she starts dinner for the family, but she doesn't eat. She's too harried. She's got too much to do. She's sort of a Martha Stewart devotee. So she wants everything perfect, and she's just can't stop. And then around 10 o'clock or so, the house is finally quiet. And so does she relax? No, she mops the floor, she gets more laundry done, she does email to 2 o'clock, and then crashes into bed. Too often, that's the kind of picture we see in society, where sleep is sacrificed for other things we have to do. And certainly someone who did that was Thomas Edison, of all people. He said that he enjoyed working 18 hours a day. Oops. And took short cat naps each day for an average about 4 to 5 hours of sleep, but really thought sleep was a wasted time. Time is the only capital that any human being has, and the thing that he can least afford to waste or lose, he said, was time during the day. But the key thing here that gives it away is the short cat naps. If you've had adequate sleep, you don't need a lot of cat naps during the day. And I suspect he was very sleepy during the day and had to take those cat naps because he didn't get enough sleep at night. And that's true for others in our society who now get 20% less sleep than our ancestors about 100 years ago compared to those 100 years ago. And our college students oversleep their alarms. Hold on, sorry about that. By about 50% of the time. And when you oversleep your alarm, that is a sign that you're exceedingly sleepy. So what are some of the challenges to getting adequate sleep? Well, there's just so many diversions. And now it's almost becoming a macho thing to say, oh, I only got 3 hours of sleep, or I can function on 4 hours of sleep. And I saw this t-shirt and I thought that that was interesting. It was for a caffeinated drink that really promotes not sleeping. And we just can't let it go. We watch our computers, we do email to the end, it's always coming in. We have late night TV, we have smartphones now that we can actually take the technology into bed, but all of this produces excessive daytime sleepiness. And then of course, there's the 20-ounce Starbucks. Now that Starbucks is opening up, we have access to that. So we got caffeine. Caffeine is the drug of choice for about 60% of Americans. And we drink about 6.3 billion gallons a year. 3.4 cups of coffee a day is for the average drinker. And for me, a tea drinker, about 2.48 gallons of tea. 70% of carbonated drinks, which I am imbibing in, is caffeinated. And we consume about 15.3 billion gallons or 574 cans of soda for every man, woman, and child. That's a lot of caffeine to keep us going during the day instead of getting sleep. So what's the big deal? We have caffeine, that'll keep us going. We have Red Bull. Why do we need sleep? Well, we need it because it does some nasty things when we don't get it. Let's first talk about what sleep really is. Sleep is being in a coma that's reversible. It's a behavioral state of disengagement from and unresponsiveness to the environment. There's a lot of physiological and behavioral processes that occur during sleep. It's not really a quiet time, and we'll share some of those. But it is a physiological process. It is recurrent every day, and it is reversible. Thank heavens for that. But how do we measure this? We do it with a sleep study called Poly, meaning many different parameters, SOM being sleep, Nography being measurement. So polysomnography. And there's a lot of things that we measure, as you can see in this picture, but there's three main ones. One is the electroencephalogram. You might be familiar with that. That measures brain waves, and that helps us to stage the sleep that you're in. Then there's electrooculogram. That measures eye movement, and that tells us also what stage of sleep you're in, as does the electromyogram. And that really is we measure chin muscles and maybe leg muscles that also may be changed during sleep. So we go through 5 stages of sleep, about 4 to 6 times a night. And that process of going from stage 1 through to stage 5 is about 60 to 90 minutes. We start with stage 1, we go to stage 5, and then the rest of the night we bounce pretty much back and forth. And then towards the end, we spend more time in stage 5. So in the beginning, stage 1 is when we're just starting in light sleep, we're just falling asleep. Our muscle activity starts to slow, maybe a little twitching, we're getting comfortable, but about almost half of our stage of time of sleep is in stage 2 sleep. And as you can see, you go from daytime kind of activity, which is these short brain waves, to something that starts to slow down. And our breathing slows down, our heart rate slows down, and our temperature begins to decrease. We'll talk about that a little more later. Then we move into stage 3 and 4 sleep. And this is that sawtooth cutting brain waves that get larger during this stage. This is stage 3 and 4 is called the deep sleep or delta sleep, because the brain waves look like the delta Latin, delta Greek symbol. But this is the time where we have both physiological and psychological restoration. If we don't get this sleep, then we don't get that restoration, and that causes damage, both to our brains, but also to our body. It is when the brain begins to generate these slow waves. We've got rhythmic breathing, limited muscle activity, and I talked about the delta waves. Stage 1 through stage 4 is considered non-rapid eye movement sleep because there is no eye movement. But when we move into stage 5, you will see that the brain waves look very similar to activity waves when you're awake, except you're asleep. And the reason we know that is from the electrooculogram and also electromyogram. And we look at the eye movements. And when the eye movements are present, that is about, that's the rapid eye movement sleep, the stage 5 sleep. That's about a quarter of the time that we're asleep. And that is associated more so with dreaming. You can dream in any stage, but more so in stage 5. Now, of course, there may be more eye movement sleep, the better the dream, but that's when we sort of process the psychological stresses of the day. And as we go through and we decide, what do we keep? What goes into deep REMs, that goes into our deep folders that we will save, and what gets jettisoned. It's like when you go through your data on your computer. What are you going to save? What are you going to keep and put into a file? And that's what happens during this stage of sleep. We also, interestingly, are paralyzed, except for our diaphragm and some other key muscles. And that's to keep you put so that you can sleep and stay in bed. But there are sleep disorders where the physiological processes that bring that about are impaired. And so people do sleepwalking, sleep talking, and other behaviors during this rapid eye movement or REM sleep. Our breathing starts to become very shallow, but they can be irregular. So that's the stage called rapid eye movement or REM sleep. And again, just as a summary of the changes physiologically during sleep, as we move through the stages, our heart rate slows down from stage 1 to 4. But then when we get into REM, you can see that it fluctuates. Our respiratory rate also slows, but it becomes irregular in REM. The same with blood pressure, and our skeletal muscle tone begins to also fluctuate. And so during REM sleep, there's a lot of instability here. And we know that sometimes there's more heart attacks and strokes during the early morning times of the day. And most often you have the greater proportion of your time in the morning is rapid eye movement sleep. And if we would to jar you awake in the early morning, you might remember your dreams. But often what we do is we go from stage 5 REM sleep back up to stage 1 and then slowly wake up. So that's why we don't remember our dreams very often. Now, our sleep does change as we age. So what you'll see here is a middle-aged normal adult. Again, I want to point out, here's your REM sleep. So it kind of goes up to REM, then stage 1, 2, 3, 4. And then the filled in colors is the proportion of time in those stages. So the green is in stage 1 through 4, and then the orange is stage REM. So you can see towards more the early morning hours here, you have more REM sleep than you do the other stages. Now, as you look at the older individual, there's several things I want to point out. First of all, when you look at the REM sleep compared to the normal adult, it decreases. So we have less, I say we, because unfortunately I'm part of that category, I guess now. We have a decrease in that. You also see more of these spikes that are in awake. So we have more awakenings, more trips to the bathroom, a little more difficulty sleeping. We know that even though there's more disruption in sleep, unlike the normal adult, that older adults aren't as sleepy because of that disruption. We don't understand that. And we also don't know whether this disruption in sleep, as we get older, everything else starts to decline a little bit, and so does our sleep integrity, whether that's something that we should worry about or not. One of the things that really drives sleep is the circadian rhythm. You've heard about this, particularly as it relates to jet lag. And so we have two forces that control our sleep. The first is called the sleep need here. And that sleep need is built up over the day. And the longer you are awake, the greater that need. And we call that the homeostatic mechanism. And that's due to a lot of things, principally our behavior. So the lack of sleep, or the more time we spend awake during the time. So if you don't sleep, you're awake, then that pressure builds. And we do call it the sleep drive or the sleep pressure. And as it builds, it really pushes us to seek sleep. On top of that, the other process is the circadian process here, and that's the sleep urge. And as you can see, during the night, it starts to decline. And then there's a little bit of a peak and then a push again. And this peak, somewhere between, I'd like to say 2 and 4 is the peak here. That's our nap time. That's our little circadian dip, as I call it, although it's a peak here, when we feel a little more sleepy in the afternoon. And then we perk up as it gets a little closer to 4 o'clock, and then it builds during the evening to when we go to sleep. So both of these two forces, sleep need and sleep urge, work sometimes in opposition, but when they are both aligned, which is this part, then during sleep, when they're both aligned, that's when we have sleep. And when we affect one or the other, either circadian by being in a different part of the country or different country itself across the pond to Europe or somewhere in Asia, then that affects our circadian rhythm and we can't sleep. And then when we stay up too long and we don't get sleep, that also affects it. Now, how do we know what your circadian rhythm is? We measure that by your body temperature. If you look at this, there's your dip. And then again, somewhere again in the afternoon, there's the rise in temperature and then it dips again. And it's this change in temperature along with physiologic mechanisms that creates the circadian rhythm. And that's how we know what rhythm of circadian phase, as we call it, different phases you're in. Now, not everyone is able to maintain the same phase. So I wanted to talk about 2 types of alterations in circadian rhythm. One is called the delayed sleep phase. And those of you who might have remembered your teenage years or who have teenagers and they're home with you, my condolences, you know this, where they're sleeping in till, in this case shown here, 11 o'clock, 9 o'clock, they're sleeping in, and they're up late. They're watching TV, they're on their smartphones probably, and their laptops. And so what you see is here, this is sorry, I have a very tricky mouse and it advances the slides when I don't want them to. So please bear with me. So what you see is, here's the normal phase and then it is delayed. That's the gap. And that's what we find in teenagers. We find that they can't fall asleep when we think they should go to sleep, and they don't get up in the morning when we think they should get up in the morning. So you see this very alert in the evening and then sleepy in the morning. And so it is delayed. Here's where we should be. This is where it is. So it's delayed. It's behind us. However, when we look at the sleep of older individuals, we often see an advanced sleep phase where they're ahead of us. So there's more of being sleepy in the early evening, so going to bed earlier, and then waking up earlier in the morning with more early morning arousal. So, and sometimes in individuals with Alzheimer's disease, we see that as well. So you might see individuals with those disease being up at 4 or 5 in the morning and then falling asleep very early in the evening around 7 or so. And that's hard for caregivers because they have to be awake during those times. But again, here you see the shift in advance of the normal circadian rhythm in those who are older. I should have said in the beginning that I am coming to you virtually from our 15,000 square foot of simulation space here in the College of Nursing. So I'm sharing some of our simulation experiential learning space with you as we go through the slides. The other change in circadian rhythm is our shift workers. And we see this now, especially in our frontline providers and also our first responders who are around the clock taking care of patients and responding to emergencies. And this is a problem because they're not getting sleep, and then that affects many things. And so some data that is a little bit scary is that when there was monitoring of 20 nuclear power workers, 25% fell asleep while operating the plant, predominantly on the night shift. We think about Chernobyl. 55% of night shift workers report nodding off or falling asleep at work at least once per week. And that's because they're just so tired. And then greater than 30% report such incidents occur more than 3 times a week. And often we talk about the second shift, where providers work long 12-hour shifts, and then like Joanne Gonzalez, they go home and then they do the work at home. And then they go to bed really early, and then they get up early and they start all over again. That's a problem. And then shift workers who are working in a phase that's opposite their normal circadian rhythm. So when they go home and try to go to sleep, it's at a phase that's different than their circadian phase, and that makes it difficult for them to sleep. And as you can see in the graphic below here, again, these are those first 4 stages of sleep, and this is awake. Naturally, you see phases 3 and 4 and REM sleep appropriately during sleep. But what you also see here is a movement into sleep during work time when they're supposed to be awake. That's not good. That's when mistakes are made. So the question then is, how much sleep do you really need? Cats, by the way, get 19 hours of sleep in 24 hours. We don't want to be like cats. So just recently, the American Academy of Sleep Medicine came up with a consensus statement, because we were still really trying to figure this out. But you do need 7 to 8 hours of sleep. There was a wonderful experiment that my mentor, David Dinges, did, and he did partial sleep deprivation for 2 weeks. So some people got 8 hours, some were randomized to get 6 hours, and others 4 hours. And after 2 weeks, they saw differences in performance, not only between the 4 hours and the 8 hours, but importantly, between 6 and 8 hours. So those who only got 6 hours of sleep every day for 2 weeks were very impaired, didn't feel so good, and their performance was below normal. And we'll talk about that more in a minute. But as you can see here in this graphic, that if you haven't had sleep, when you do go to sleep after a sleepless night, then the next day you fall asleep pretty readily. That's why it's flat. The minutes you just right out. Normally, however, as you can see here, normally it takes about 10 to 20 minutes to fall asleep. If you've had the previous night a real long duration of sleep and you've satisfied your sleep debt pretty well, it may take you up to 20 minutes. So my advice to you is give it some time. It may take you about 15 or 20 minutes to fall asleep. Don't look at the clock though and time it. Just relax, and because of that sleep pressure, sleep will come. But if you don't get sleep, what happens? And it's not pretty. Let me tell you. First, importantly, it affects your immunity. So you're more likely to become infected. You're more likely to get flu. You're more likely probably to get the COVID. And so you want to make sure one thing you can do is to get your sleep. But we also know that it's related to mental health. It's related to weight gain. If the shorter the sleep you have, the more you can tendency to gain weight. So you can't lose weight as well. You're more irritable. You have more accidents. And it also is associated with diabetes, cardiovascular disease, and other comorbidities. Right now, we know those are associated also with increased risk with the COVID-19 virus. So sleep deprivation also affects performance. It affects your ability to hear and to see. and it affects your motor skills. So response time is affected, your ability to learn, which I tell the students, don't stay up all night, because while you're in the 2 o'clock in the morning trying to read what you're supposed to be learning, you're not learning. So go to bed and then get up and work. Your memory will not be there. And also any tasks or procedures that you're used to doing, you're not going to do them so well. So when sleep-deprived persons are asked to perform almost any short-term task, they are highly motivated to do so. They can do those tasks. So the trick here is that it's not that you can't do the tasks. It's that you're not going to be able to do them well. You might start out with doing them well, but you cannot do it intensively or extensively during a duration. So you can't maintain your attention. And that's the problem. And even though you may not feel sleepy, and we have studies where people initially in sleep deprivation situations might begin to feel sleepy, but then it levels off and their perception is that they're not sleepy, but we measure them physiologically and the reaction time, and they're sleepy, profoundly sleepy. So you can't always go on how you feel. The fundamental effects from sleep loss permeates every performance, all your cognitive and ability to pay attention tasks. And this is not trivial. The most powerful determinant of lapsing or not paying attention when there's a stimulus and your decreased performance is evident in a sleepy person. And most of the thing that's required to let us see that is how long the task is. So a quick little thing you might be able to push through. But if it's a long thing like driving, you're not going to be able to do it. And that's what causes accidents. So if you're about 18 hours without sleep, so over 2 days without sleep, your reaction time begins to slow from 1/4 of a second to 1/2 a second and then longer. Just think about that light turning from yellow to red and you miss it. You miss that stop sign that's there at an intersection. And then while you're driving, you have these micro sleeps. There are moments when you zone out and anywhere between 2 and 20 seconds. So your eyes may be open, but your brain is asleep. Have you ever gone and been all of a sudden aware of being in a location, but you have no idea how you got there while you were driving? That was a micro sleep. So it's really important because that's what causes accidents. And the reduced reaction time that we witness in those who are sleepy is roughly the same as someone with a blood alcohol level of 0.08. And if you know about driving and blood alcohol, you know that you can be arrested for driving under the influence of a level 0.08 or more in 49 states. So you're essentially driving drunk when you are driving sleepy. And 2 nights without sleep performance dramatically decreases your ability to react beyond double what it was the first night. And you fall, as my colleague said, who's done extensive research in the area, massively off the cliff. And he did research, with long haul airline pilots in Boeing, and looked at those who he gave a nap to and those he didn't. And this was going from Hawaii to Tokyo. And the only reason that they landed safely in Tokyo was that even though physiologically they measured them, and they know that the ones that did not get the nap, that they were physiologically sleepy, and they could show that they were sleepy and they were falling asleep physiologically, even though their eyes were open. But the excitement of landing the plane was the only thing that enabled them to land safely. And the consequences are really serious. More than 100,000 motor vehicle accidents annually are sleep related, and disasters which you all may know: Chernobyl, 3 Mile Island, the Challenger, Bhopal in India, and the Exxon Valdez were officially attributed to errors in judgment because of sleepiness or fatigue. So you can't think straight, you can't process information, and that is important. Here's another graphic, one of my very favorites, shared with me by Dr. Dinges. it shows a truck, but just picture a car as well. Of course, we have trucks on the road. And so if your truck is going at 60 miles an hour, a drowsy driver will drift off in a few seconds, those micro sleeps, to a 4-angle drift, and be within 2 seconds has traveled 190 feet and completely out of lane. So I always know that sleepiness has been a problem when in fact people have single vehicular accidents, or a truck driver has rammed into one of the toll booths, or there's been another accident where they a car is slammed into a car ahead, and somewhere about early morning. And that I know is a sleep related, that they were up all night, and that is why they crashed. And here are other crashes that were associated with sleep. So sleep will happen. This sleep pressure will push through and make you go to sleep, whether you want to or not. You cannot control it. And so the forest fires can sleep when there's fires still around them. There's hazmat truck crash, which you might have heard about. And I'm sure you recall the Buffalo crash where the pilot and the flight attendant were killed in '09, was related to not getting enough sleep. And it affects other things, such as relationships. This is work that I did with a postdoc of mine, Judy Reichstein. And we found that people who didn't get enough sleep had problems at work. They had problems with productivity. They fall asleep. Their coworkers don't trust them because they screw up and they get fired. They have problems with their marital relationships. They're more likely to become divorced. They have more altercations, and they have a lack of sexual interest. It's not only the interest, we also know that there is a lack of performance and problems with orgasm, as well as interest with lack of sleep. There's restrictions of social life. They're too tired to do things with friends and family. They don't want to go and visit. They fall asleep too early, or they're afraid they're going to fall asleep and embarrass themselves. And so people think that they're lacking interest in the conversation or what's going on, but really they're falling asleep. And as I said, they're impatient and they're irritable. My husband knows, just if I'm a happy camper, if I'm fed and I get enough sleep, otherwise it can be ugly. So when we did this work, we found that people overall, no matter what area of their life, sleep affects it. Their general ability to do things, their ability to pay attention, get their paperwork done, pay their bills, keep up with people their own age, being able to socialize and have intimate and sexual relationships. All aspects of life are affected by not having enough sleep. So what do we do about that? Well, there are some sleep hygiene measures that you can take that make sure you get a good night's sleep, and what you do when you wake up during the night. First, it's really important that you maintain a regular schedule, especially rise time. Make sure you get up about the same time during the day. On the weekends, you could push it back an hour, but don't do the sleep in until noon because you've been up and not sleeping all week. That will not work, because what happens often Sunday night, people try to go to sleep and they can't because they have to go to work the next morning. They have to get up and they can't sleep. The reason is because sleep is very behavioral, and you have told your brain that you go to sleep at 11 to 12, 1 o'clock in the morning. But now you're in bed at 10 o'clock and the brain says, whoa, I'm confused. You told me bedtime was 1 or 2, and now you're in here at 10. I'm not ready to go to sleep because you've trained me to go to sleep later. So you have to maintain a bedtime. Of course, you want to avoid stimulants that would keep you awake. Alcohol will put you to sleep initially, and it does, by the way, perpetuate the deficits we see in performance because of sleepiness. So the combination is awful. And there are more crashes at 2 a.m. because people were drinking and then they drove being sleepy. But you want to try to avoid caffeine, like from noon on if you can, because that'll be a problem. And as I said, what happens with alcohol is it'll put you to sleep, but as your alcohol level drops, it disrupts those stages of sleep. So instead of getting into the restorative stages of sleep, it's like someone keep waking you up every few hours. That's what alcohol does when you have a large amount in your system, as the amount of alcohol declines towards zero. I know these are trying times. And so what you want to do is set aside a time to worry, which is not why you're in bed. So take some time during the day. It could be late afternoon or early morning, and relax. You could meditate, but also think about the things that are bothering you, what you might do about it, and then just leave it and go into bed. If your environment is cool and dark and quiet, that promotes sleep. And this is very important in this day and age. You should use the bed for only one of two things. One of them is sleep, and you can figure out the other. But it's really important not to take your phone into bed, the laptop into bed. Don't do work in bed. You can read a little bit, but don't read for prolonged periods of time, or watch TV for long periods of time. I wouldn't do it for more than an hour, because then you're training the brain that the bed is not for sleep. It's for doing work. It's for watching TV. It's for all the things that are not sleep. So that's why that's important. But also, you don't want to sleep too long during the day, because then you get into a cycle of requiring that nap, like Thomas Edison. And then you can't get away from it. It's important during that dip. It's okay. It's actually good for your performance in the afternoon. Take a little nap, but not more than 30 minutes. Also, before going to bed, you want to avoid large meals, because your gastrointestinal speed slows down when you sleep. So that 12-topping pizza will remind you it's there if you have it right before going to sleep. And no fights before sleep or other emotional activities, because that gets your adrenaline going and you're not going to sleep. If you find that you have problems going to sleep, you want to get out of bed, because you don't want to associate not sleeping with the bed. That's insomnia. Difficulty falling asleep and maintaining asleep is the definition of insomnia. So what you want to do is get out of bed. Do not look at the clock. Turn the clock around when you go to bed. Don't look at the clock, because it'll be, oh my gosh, it's 3 a.m, I'm not sleeping. And that adrenaline will just keep you awake. So it becomes a vicious cycle. Get out of bed. If you're hungry, get a little wee bite. Like last night, I had a little trouble sleeping. It was a long day. I got a little wee bite, went back to bed, fell sound asleep. It works every time if you do it right. If you are having sustained problems with sleep, there is cognitive behavioral therapy, and a sleep provider can help you with that. And it works just as well as pharmaceutical agents. And then, of course, for jet lag, melatonin is also something to be helpful. If you follow these sleep rules, you will sleep. But I've shared here some websites I thought you might find helpful, where you can get further information. The National Center of Sleep Disorders Research, just like right now, the National Institute for Allergy and Immunology is providing us with information about COVID-19. The National Center for Sleep Disorders Research at NIH has a wealth of information for the layperson about sleep, as does the American Academy of Sleep Medicine. You can find out the latest science from the new abstracts and papers in sleep. And the National Sleep Foundation also has a wealth of information. So I thank you for spending your lunchtime with me here from the virtual sleep lab at the College of Nursing. And I hope that indeed you get sufficient sleep so that you can get through this trying time. So thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Dean Weaver. This was incredibly informative and helpful. I think we have time for just a few questions. And so if I can go ahead and get started. The first question from our audience is, if you have to sacrifice an hour of sleep to get daily exercise and get in 6 to 7 hours a night, is it worth it?
No. So here's the conundrum. If you don't get enough sleep, you won't lose weight. And so the exercise really doesn't help a whole lot. And this is the tough thing between, do you do one or do the other? You have to do both. And so it's really tough, but whatever else you're doing, you're going to have to put that aside. I think it's important to come up with a time every day that you exercise, but you have to make sure you get your 7 or 8 hours of sleep, because that exercise will be doing you no good at all. So that's the answer. You need both, just like you need nutrition. So you wouldn't stop eating because you're going to exercise. Well, you can't stop sleeping either.
And it won't replace it if the exercise won't replace what you need.
You need all of them.
Yeah. Thank you. Next question is, are there any causes that you could attribute to waking up with a headache?
Sometimes, especially if you haven't been imbibing, there are sleep disorders that might cause that. We do give off carbon dioxide when we sleep, and when that's impaired, like if you have obstructive sleep apnea, you'll wake with a headache. So if you also have snoring or gasping or wake up tired or feel you don't have a restful night's sleep, you might contact your provider and they may evaluate you for a sleep disorder like obstructive sleep apnea, because you have problems with your breathing during sleep, so you don't get rid of that carbon dioxide, and that's what constricts the blood vessels, affects the blood vessels in your brain, causing the headache.
Interesting. Thank you. Is there a formula for the number of minutes one should be in light sleep versus deep sleep versus REM to successfully achieve that 7 to 8 hours?
Well, if you achieve 7 to 8 hours, you will go through all those cycles as you should. So as I said, about a quarter of the time is in the REM sleep, so you can do the math there. And then about half the time is stage 2 sleep, and then the remaining is just a short time at stage 1 and stage 3, 4 sleep. So if you go to sleep and you sleep for 7 to 8 hours, you will go through and get sufficient amount of time for each of those stages. You'll go through all stages, and then the body kind of goes back and forth depending if you get up and go back to sleep, or it just transitions amongst those stages, but you will get the efficient amount to restore your body physically and mentally.
And that's really helpful, especially if people get up, because I know there's concern that you won't get the kind of levels of sleep that you need. Great. Next question. If you have trouble falling asleep, is it okay to use melatonin regularly?
Melatonin really doesn't produce any harm if given the appropriate dose, and you can talk to your provider about that. Melatonin, however, will not make you sleepy. Melatonin sets into process the physiological neurotransmitters that the neurological process that initiates the sleepiness. So it's probably pretty good for jet lag, not always the best thing for having difficulty falling asleep. But if you find that it helps you to relax and to get to sleep, then you can continue it. But I would rather have you figure out why you're not sleeping, so you're not dependent on that. And that could be either because of violating those rules that I said and not engaging in good sleep hygiene, or perhaps there's a sleep disorder and you should talk to your provider about that.
That's interesting. Next question. Is there such a thing as too much sleep?
Yes, there is. And so sleep is sort of a U shape that we know. We have people who get less sleep, and there are a few, don't take this to be you, but there are some who genetically need a little less sleep, but that is such an infinitesimal number of people. Then you have the normal 7 to 8, and then you have some who are sleeping 9 hours. Those who are long sleepers tend to have more comorbidities, more chronic disease, and not as healthy. So if you need that much sleep and you are getting it routine, 9 hours every night, then you might talk again with your provider as well. That's more common if you haven't been getting sleep, and then of course you crash and you go to sleep and you'll sleep for 9 hours. That's not what we're talking about here.
Yeah, because your body's exhausted. Many people are reporting that they have difficulty sleeping during the current crisis, awful nightmares, waking up frequently, etc. Any suggestions?
I would follow the sleep hygiene rules. So when this is available, just jot them down because they work. Set aside a time to worry that's not right before going to bed. Be confident that you're going to fall asleep. The more you worry about falling asleep, the more you won't sleep. Then get into a relaxed mood, do something very relaxing. You can use meditation, relaxation techniques, breathing techniques, I watch a little TV, that's my thing. And also a routine bedtime behavior is good. So don't change what you do, your preparation for going to bed. So if it's, I get up, I get undressed, I put my pajamas on, I brush my teeth, I get into bed, I read a little bit. If you do that over and over again, then that tells your brain, oh, it's time for sleep. We're getting ready for sleep. And then it will adjust accordingly. So that it's very behavioral.
Yeah, and training yourself, it's really interesting. And also your comment before about not looking at the clock, which is the very first thing I do whenever I wake up. So, and then immediately go, oh, it's 2 a.m.
Yeah, nope, turn it over, turn your phone over, turn the clock around. I actually don't have a clock in my bedroom. I do have the phone, but I don't have a clock. Of course, I have to admit, I have Alexa and I can ask her what time it is.
Right.
But I can't look at the clock.
Yeah, no, and it's smart because that's the first thing, of course, and then you worry about what time it is, which is counterproductive.
Right.
Another question from our participants: is there a biological reason that some people are night owls and some people are early birds, and can that be switched?
There are larks and there are night owls, and that is a genetic predisposition. So you can determine which one you are. The thing is, you want to make sure that you're not one or the other because you haven't gotten sufficient amount of sleep. But there is a natural tendency, and there are, I've used in my research an instrument that classifies you as being more, we call it morningness or eveningness. And just though you're able to keep within the normal circadian frame of not being up too late or not getting up too early, then it's perfectly fine.
So this question is about children. So if children wake up in the middle of the night because they've had a bad dream or can't sleep, what are some ways to get them back to sleep? And then I'm going to add on to that, is it similar, the same patterns in establishing routine?
It is. And the one thing that I always suggest to new parents, it's so hard to let a baby cry, but babies and children have to learn how to fall asleep. And there's a lot of controversy and cultural preference for whether children should come into the bed. My guidance is not to, because they have to learn to sleep in their bed and they have to learn to fall asleep on their own. So I think going into the room, comforting them, telling them that they'll go to sleep, maybe read a little bit with them, and then let them go back to sleep. If they still fuss, don't go back in the room, because that's what they want, and they'll want you there a lot. And then you don't get your sleep. But it's hard because they cry and they want you and you love them, but that's what you have to do. And lo and behold, they will learn themselves how to fall back to sleep. And then it's great.
That's right. And then the pattern too, if you fall asleep to not making it a pattern by the next night and just getting out of there. Great. Let's see. Okay. Is there a way to reset to find out how many hours one naturally needs for optimal sleep?
Well, when that best comes through is when you're on vacation, where you're not doing anything but relaxing and you can sleep as long as you want. When you look at your normal pattern of when you fall asleep and when you get up, if you're not out partying too late, you actually will see what your normal rhythm is. Mm-hmm. And then you want to really try to adhere to that when you're working as well.
Can I interpret that to say you just told us to go on vacation when we can?
I hope that will be soon. I really do. I hope that will be soon.
Next question. So for waking up, is there an advantage to the slowly increasing lights versus alarm clocks versus sleep cycle apps?
No, I don't think so. The one thing I do want to share with you is one way to know if you've got a sufficient sleep is if you wake up before your alarm. That's what I talked about, the college students not, because they are notorious for not getting sleep. But if you wake up before your alarm, then that's also a way to tell what your normal wake time is and how long you need to sleep. When you think about when you went to bed and then you wake up and you say, oh, all right, I got this amount of sleep. I'm pretty good myself, a 7.5, 8 hour person. So it doesn't then matter which wakes you up. It would be better if you didn't need those, but I know the reality is we do. So whatever is less of a challenge for you, I'd rather have Alexa wake me up and that noise than my phone, which is more irritating. So, so decide which is the best for you.
So would you, as a follow-up question, would you recommend if you wake up at 6 a.m. and your alarm is supposed to go off at 7, do you stay up at 6 a.m.? Do you just relax? Try and
I
go
would
to sleep
get
for an
out of
hour?
bed. I'd get out of bed. If you feel awake, if you don't feel you could turn over and doze for that half hour, whenever I've tried it, I really don't go back to sleep. Better just get up, be grateful that you feel good if you feel awake. And now if you find you're waking up a lot, you have early morning awakenings and you don't feel refreshed, there may be a sleep disorder. And so you do want to seek attention for that because you may have sleep apnea there, or some form of insomnia.
I'm guessing this question is being asked about one's spouse, but I don't know that. In which cycle do you typically see loud snoring?
Well, snoring can occur throughout all cycles. We see more of it typically in the REM cycles because snoring is related to, actually snoring is abnormal, by the way. You shouldn't be snoring. If your nose is a little stopped up, maybe, but snoring is not a normal process. So snoring is because of the relaxation of the muscles in the back of the throat. And remember, we said that in REM sleep, there's more muscle relaxation. So that's why most often occurs there, but it can occur in any stage of sleep. And if there is loud snoring, also gasping, for breath, and that's noted by a bed partner, then you really should recommend that person seek medical attention because they may very well have sleep apnea. And sleep apnea really produces a lot of negative outcomes, not only the behavioral outcomes of sleepiness, but it is associated with increased mortality and also with cardiovascular disease, hypertension, diabetes, and cancer. Nasty things. So you want to get it treated.
That's very interesting about snoring, and I bet not popular or widely known that it's not something people should be doing. I think we have time for one last question. What do you suggest for preparing for an overseas trip where there is a substantial time difference?
Well, that's a great question, one that I'm very familiar with. I do a lot of international travel, and there's a couple approaches. You can a few days ahead because it's I should say, a day per hour of time difference. So for example, if you're going to the West Coast from here, that's 2 hours difference. So it'll take you 2 days to adjust. If you go over to Asia and it's 12 hours, it'll take you almost 2 weeks to adjust. So you could start for that time difference or start earlier on to get slowly, gradually shifting your circadian phase by changing your time to get into bed and the time you wake up, using your alarm clock to shift your phase close in alignment to the time where you'll be. That's one. The other is to keep your normal phase. Sometimes that's difficult. And then use melatonin or some other sleep aid that I use that can help you get a good night's sleep and wake refreshed during your time there so that you can be alert for meetings and other things.
Well, Dean Weaver, thank you so very much for spending your time with us and sharing all of your expertise. This has been incredibly informative. And to you and to all of our fellow nurses, thank you again for everything that you do for us, especially during this time, but always. Please join us next week on Monday, May 11th for our next Alumni Exchange event at noon featuring College of Liberal Arts Professor Steve Jones. We'll be presenting an interactive discussion on The Beat Goes On, Music and Culture and Creativity During Crisis. And the following Monday on May 18th, we will be joined by UIC Chancellor Emeritus, who will share an update from UIC and answer questions. We hope that you can join us for both these events and all the other ones that we have upcoming. And again, as I mentioned, I will say that website one more time at go.uic.edu/alumni-exchange. This will be available, the recording will be available in about 10 days on that same website. And of course, please be on the lookout for a survey about this program. Thank you again, Dean Weaver, and thank you to all of you for joining us. We look forward to seeing you again in the Alumni Exchange. Thanks so much and have a great day.
Thank you. Bye, everyone.